She didn't ask for permission, she just moved. The dying man on the gurney had maybe 90 seconds before his heart stopped for good. Federal agents blocked her path. Security protocols required clearance. Senior staff hesitated, arguing about authorization while monitors screamed flatline warnings. Her hands didn't hesitate. 8 minutes of combat-level trauma response. Needle decompression executed with precision no civilian nurse should possess. The patient's pulse returned. The room exhaled. Then the administrator's voice cut through the silence like a blade.
Terminated. Effective immediately. Gross insubordination.
She stripped off her blood-stained gloves with surgical calm. Around her, the heartbeat she'd restored beeped steady on the monitors. Security escorted her out. Badge confiscated. Career destroyed. But one nurse noticed the tattoo barely visible on the patient's arm, military insignia, and he noticed her movements. Too precise, too controlled, too familiar. She reached her car in the parking lot at dusk. Her hands finally trembled. Then 10 black SUVs rolled in. Headlights surrounded her from every direction. Doors opened in perfect synchronization. What had she just saved, and who was she really?
From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories about hidden courage and impossible choices speak to you, consider subscribing. She stood trapped in a circle of federal vehicles. The man she saved was no ordinary patient.
The alarm didn't wake her at 4:47 a.m. because she was already sitting on the edge of her bed, bare feet flat against cold hardwood, spine straight. Evangeline March had been awake for 11 minutes, listening to the city's pre-dawn sounds through windows. She checked every night before sleeping. 3 locks on the door, 2 on each window, a 4th-floor walk-up with clear sightlines to the street below. Her apartment held almost nothing, a bed with sheets pulled so tight a coin would bounce, a single dresser with 4 drawers, each containing precisely folded clothing, organized by function and color, a kitchen with 1 plate, 1 bowl, 1 set of utensils kept unnaturally sharp, the kind of space that looked temporary even after 3 months of occupancy. On the dresser sat a wooden box no larger than a hardcover book, brass corners worn smooth from handling, a small lock keeping it closed. She stood from the bed and moved toward it with the fluid economy of someone who had performed this same ritual for years. Her fingers hovered over the lock, traced the grain of the wood, then withdrew without opening it. 50 push-ups, controlled descent, explosive rise. Her breath came in measured counts, exhaled on exertion. 100 sit-ups followed, core tight, movement precise. She stretched in a sequence that would look familiar to anyone who had trained for combat operations. Shoulders, hips, spine. Each position held for exactly 15 seconds while she counted in a language that wasn't English. The words came soft, automatic. A whisper she didn't seem to notice making. The compass came out of a drawer, silver, no larger than a $50, suspended on a thin chain. She held it in her palm, watching the needle settle north, then tucked it into the pocket of her scrubs. Small enough to hide, significant enough to carry every single day. She made coffee in a French press, timing the steep with her phone. 4 minutes, black, no sugar. While it brewed, she stood at the window watching the street below. 2 joggers passed heading east. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Normal morning patterns, nothing that raised flags. She pulled the shade and drank the coffee standing up. On her way out, the mail slot caught her attention. 1 envelope stuck out from the usual junk. Official government letterhead. Stamped final notice in red across the front. She stared at it for 3 seconds, jaw setting, then left it where it was. The walk to St. Catherine's Trauma Center took 18 minutes at her standard pace. She arrived at 6:13 a.m., 3 minutes before shift change, and entered through the staff entrance using a badge that still felt foreign, clipped to her pale blue scrubs. The photo showed her face blank, professional, revealing nothing. The emergency room at shift change moved like controlled chaos. Overnight staff briefed incoming personnel on active cases, while monitors beeped their constant symphonies of vital signs. The smell hit first. Antiseptic over blood, over fear, coffee and sweat. The fluorescent lights washed everything in the kind of brightness that made shadows disappear. Nurse Maris Keld stood at the central station, reviewing charts. 50-something, gray hair pulled back tight. lines around her eyes that spoke to 3 decades in emergency medicine. She glanced up as Evie approached, nodded once. Your observation today, March. Log vitals on the patients in beds 4 through 9. Don't touch anything you're not cleared for. Questions go through me or Dr. Holland. Understood. Keld's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. You've been here 3 weeks. Still settling in? Yes, ma'am. The ma'am made Keld's eyebrow twitch. Most nurses didn't use that particular formality. But she said nothing, just returned to her charts. Evie moved to the supply station and began organizing a cart for her rounds. Gauze, tape, alcohol swabs, thermometer covers. Her hands worked with mechanical precision, stacking packages in order of likely use, checking expiration dates, ensuring everything aligned at right angles. The cart looked like it had been prepared for inspection. Another nurse passed behind her. Tate. Early 30s, quick smile, curious eyes. He paused watching her work. You stack sutures like a field medic. Where'd you train? Evie's hand stopped for half a second. Just careful, I guess. Nobody's that careful naturally. Military? Nursing school? Standard protocol? Tate studied her a moment longer. Standard protocol doesn't usually include arranging trauma shears by blade length. He walked away before she could respond, but his glance back suggested the conversation wasn't finished. She kept a set of trauma shears in her pocket. Not standard issue. The handles were wrapped in paracord, dark green, the kind of modification someone makes when gear needs to function in the field under stress. The blade had been sharpened more recently than regulation required. She realized she was touching them and forced her hand away. The morning moved in the rhythm of routine emergencies. A construction worker with a nail gun injury, a teenager with a possible concussion from skateboarding, an elderly woman with chest pain that turned out to be severe indigestion. Evie observed, logged vitals, said little. She noticed things the other nurses didn't comment on. The way the construction worker favored his left side suggested old rib damage beyond today's injury. The teenager's pupils suggested something more than a concussion. The elderly woman's breathing pattern indicated anxiety, not cardiac. She said nothing. Observation only. That was the assignment. Dr. Holland arrived at 9 a.m. Late 30s, confident stride, expensive watch. He reviewed the overnight cases with Keld, then made rounds. Evie followed at a respectful distance. Clipboard ready. At bed 7, a patient complained of increasing chest tightness. Holland listened to his lungs, checked his vitals, ordered routine monitoring. Evie watched the man's breathing, too shallow on the left side. She saw the slight asymmetry in chest rise, the way he winced when he inhaled deeply on that side. Doctor, the breathing pattern suggests possible pneumothorax on the left. We should consider imaging. Holland turned slowly. His expression shifted from professional to condescending in the space of a heartbeat. You're here to learn, not diagnose. The patient's vitals are stable. We'll monitor. But the chest expansion is uneven and, Nurse March, you've been here 3 weeks. I've been doing this for 12 years. We'll monitor. He walked away. Keld gave her a look that said, drop it. Evie made a note on her clipboard and said nothing more. 2 hours later, the patient in bed 7 crashed, suddenly. His oxygen saturation plummeted, and he gasped for air like a drowning man. Holland rushed in, reassessed, and performed an emergency needle decompression followed by a chest tube. Collapsed lung, tension pneumothorax. Exactly what Evie had suggested. When the patient stabilized, Holland took the credit in his notes, made rounds again with residents, explaining how he'd caught the early signs. Evie stood in the back of the group, listening to him describe observations she had made. Her face showed nothing. Tate found her in the supply room after the residents dispersed. You called that 2 hours ago. I suggested imaging. You diagnosed it. Holland took credit. She organized bandages into their designated bins. It doesn't matter. Doesn't it bother you? She looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were the kind of gray that could look either soft or hard depending on the light. Right now, they look like stone. What bothers me is that we wait for authorization while patients get worse. But I'm observation only, so I observe. Tate studied her. You're not a normal rookie. I'm just careful. No, you're something else. I just haven't figured out what yet. He left her alone with the supplies. She finished organizing, making sure everything sat in perfect alignment. then returned to her rounds. Her hand found the compass in her pocket. She didn't pull it out, just held it through the fabric like a talisman. The afternoon brought the usual parade of emergencies, minor traumas, cardiac events, overdoses. Evie moved through them with quiet efficiency, always watching, always noticing details others missed. She didn't offer diagnoses anymore, just logged vitals and waited to be told what to do. At 2:47 p.m., everything changed. The code blue alarm shattered the afternoon routine. Its shriek cut through conversation and thought. All available personnel to ER1, unidentified trauma, federal escort inbound, federal escort. That wasn't standard language. Evie's head snapped toward the windows facing the helipad. Other staff moved with professional urgency, but not the kind of precision that suggested they understood what federal escort meant. She did. Her hand went to the compass. Through the glass, a helicopter descended. Black. No hospital markings, no news logos, just flat black paint and a tail number that probably wouldn't show up in any civilian registry. She moved toward ER1. The trauma bay was already filling with staff. Keld positioned nurses. Holland scrubbed in. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Through the exterior doors, they could hear the helicopter's rotors beating air into submission. The doors burst open. 2 EMTs rushed a gurney through. Behind them, 6 men in dark suits moved with synchronized precision. Earpieces, hands held at waist level in the ready position. Eyes constantly scanning. They weren't hospital security. They weren't even regular federal agents. These men moved like protective details for someone whose life had strategic value. On the gurney, an older man, 60 maybe, 65, civilian clothes, no identification visible, massive chest trauma, blood soaked through field dressings applied by someone who knew what they were doing. His face was pale, lips blue. The monitor showed a heart rate too fast and blood pressure too low. He was dying. Holland moved forward. One of the suited men stepped between him and the patient. This patient is classified. Await authorization. Holland froze. What? You need security clearance to treat. Authorization is being processed. He's in shock. He needs immediate intervention. Await authorization. The room filled with tension thick enough to cut. Holland looked at Keld. Keld looked at the suits. The suits looked at nothing and everyone. On the gurney, the man's monitors screamed warnings. Heart rate climbing, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation falling. Someone get administration. We need clearance protocols. The man on the gurney would be dead before administration arrived. Everyone in the room knew it. No. One moved. Evie pushed through the outer ring of observers. She ignored the conversation about authorization and clearance. Her eyes locked on the patient. She saw what the others were missing because they were too busy arguing about permission. His right forearm was visible below the blood-soaked sleeve. A tattoo, partially obscured but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. A trident. Eagle. Anchor. Not the regular Navy anchor. The Naval Special Warfare insignia. The mark worn by SEALs and the medical personnel who kept them alive. His hands bore scars, rope burns at the wrists, old but distinct. Shrapnel damage across the knuckles from blast impacts. The kind of damage that came from years in combat zones, not accidents. The chest wound pattern, she'd seen it before. IED blast, the asymmetric trauma of a shaped charge, too precise for a heart attack, too familiar for anything else. She moved to the head of the gurney. "Ma'am, step back." The suited man's voice carried authority and threat in equal measure. She didn't look at him. Her hands were already on the patient, checking pupil response, assessing the chest trauma. Her fingers moved with speed that suggested muscle memory so deep it bypassed conscious thought. Tamponade, blast cavity. He's got maybe 2 minutes. Holland heard her. "What did you say?" She spoke louder, hands never stopping. "Pericardial tamponade. He needs immediate decompression. The blood is crushing his heart. If we don't drain it now, he's gone." The suited men moved closer. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the patient." She finally looked at one of them. Her eyes were flat, hard, carrying something that made the man hesitate. "He's dead in 90 seconds if I stop. You want to explain that to whoever sent you?" The agent's hand hovered near his jacket. Then he stepped back. 1 step. It was enough. Evie's hands moved. She didn't wait for permission, didn't ask for equipment. She simply took what she needed from the crash cart with the kind of certainty that came from doing this exact procedure under worse conditions. Intubation tube, laryngoscope, her movements compressed into 8 seconds, what would take most nurses 30. Tate watched from the edge of the room. His mouth opened slightly. Nobody moved that fast. Nobody should be able to. Needle decompression next. She located the precise insertion point by feel, adjusted for the blast pattern, and drove the needle home with controlled force. The angle was perfect, the depth exactly correct. Blood and fluid drained. The monitor's alarms shifted pitch as pressure released from around his heart. "Who the hell taught you that?" Holland's voice carried shock and something that might have been respect. She didn't answer. Her focus never left the patient. She worked for 8 minutes straight, each movement economical, no wasted motion, no hesitation. She talked to the unconscious man like she knew him, like this mattered beyond professional duty. "Stay with me. You don't get to check out yet. Not like this." Her voice cracked once, just once, a hairline fracture in otherwise perfect composure. Not after everything. The words carried weight, history, loss. No one in the room understood what she meant, but everyone heard the grief underneath. The monitor changed. The flatline stuttered. 1 beat, 2, then a rhythm. Weak, thready, but present. A pulse. The room exhaled collectively. Holland moved in. "We need to get him to surgery, now. Cardiac team, prep OR3. The flurry of movement that followed was controlled chaos. The patient was rushed towards surgical suites. Federal agents formed a protective corridor. Evie stood alone at the now empty gurney, hands still gloved, covered in blood that was already drying to rust. She stripped the gloves off with precision, one finger at a time, the motions automatic. She set them in the biohazard bin and stood there, looking at her hands. They were steady. They always were. Behind her, the ER began to resume its normal operations. Staff dispersed to other patients. The crisis was over. A life had been saved. Everything should have been fine. The doors to the ER burst open again. Not emergency personnel this time. Hospital Administrator Vernon Gast stormed in, flanked by 2 security guards. His face was red, his expensive suit somehow looking disheveled despite its perfect tailoring. His eyes locked on Evie. She knew what was coming before he spoke. She recognized that particular expression, institutional authority offended by someone breaking the chain of command. Who authorized that intervention? Keld stepped forward. The patient was dying. She saved his... Gast cut her off. Who authorized Nurse March to override federal protocols during a classified incident? No one responded. The answer was obvious. No one had authorized anything. She had simply acted. Gast turned to face the room, made sure his voice carried to every corner. "Evangeline March, you are terminated effective immediately for gross insubordination and breach of protocol. You violated chain of command during a federal security incident. You are dismissed." The room went silent. Even the monitors seemed to quiet. Evie said nothing. She looked at Gast with the same flat expression she'd given the federal agent. Then she began removing her equipment. Trauma shears from her pocket, stethoscope from around her neck. She set each item on the nearby tray with careful precision, each movement controlled. Her hands didn't shake. Everyone else's did. Tate stepped forward. She saved his life. Without her, he'd be... Gast's glare stopped him. "That will be all, Nurse Tate, unless you'd like to join her." Tate looked at Evie. She shook her head once. A tiny movement. He backed down. The federal agent stood against the far wall, silent, stone-faced, not intervening, not defending her, just watching with expressions that revealed nothing. Keld touched Evie's arm. "I'm sorry." "You did the right thing." Evie's voice came out, quiet but steady. "I know. Security will escort you out." Gast gestured to the 2 guards flanking him. "Make sure she leaves hospital property." The walk through the ER felt endless. Past patients she'd monitored that morning, past staff who avoided her eyes, past Dr. Holland who stared at the floor as she passed. Only Tate met her gaze. He nodded once, a gesture of respect that cost him nothing and meant everything. They passed the observation window to the surgical corridor. Through the glass, she could see prep teams working on the patient she'd saved, surgeons in position, monitors showing that fragile pulse holding steady. He was alive. That mattered more than anything else. She stopped walking. The security guards tensed but didn't move her along. She stood there looking through the glass at the unconscious man who bore the scars of service she recognized because she bore the same ones. Her hand went to her pocket, found the compass. She held it through the fabric. Fair winds. The words came out as a whisper, a naval phrase, a blessing for those going into danger. The security guard closest to her frowned, clearly not understanding. "Ma'am, let's go." She released the compass and resumed walking. The exit led to the staff parking lot. Late afternoon sun slanted through the urban canyon, traffic sounds, distant sirens. The ordinary world continuing its ordinary operations while her life imploded. The security guard stopped at the door. One handed her a folded paper. Formal termination notice. Signature required from HR within 48 hours. She took it without reading. "You need to return your badge." She'd already removed it, handed it over. The laminated card with her unsmiling photo. 3 weeks of employment ending in a strip of plastic being dropped into a security pouch. The door closed behind her with electronic finality. She stood in the parking lot, holding a termination notice and nothing else. Her car sat in the far corner of the lot. Economy sedan, 5 years. Old, chosen for its reliability and anonymity. She walked toward it with the same controlled pace she'd maintained inside. No rushing, no dramatic storming away. Just steady forward progress. She unlocked the driver's door and slid behind the wheel, closed the door. The sudden silence felt oppressive after the constant noise of the ER. She sat there staring at the steering wheel, hands at 10 and 2, not starting the engine. For the first time since the morning, her composure showed a crack. Her right hand trembled slightly as it reached for the keys in the ignition. She caught it, pressed both palms flat against the steering wheel, controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. The combat breathing technique they had taught her years ago for managing stress in the field. She pulled the compass from her pocket, held it in her palm. The needle settled north. North was away from here. North was toward somewhere that wasn't this parking lot, this hospital, this disaster. She'd lasted 3 weeks in civilian nursing, 3 weeks of quiet work, 3 weeks of trying to be invisible, 3 weeks of thinking maybe she could have the normal life she'd wanted when she'd filed the discharge papers. The compass weighed almost nothing, but it felt heavy in her palm. She thought about the wooden box back in her apartment, the things locked inside that she never opened, the life she'd left behind that kept finding ways to reach forward and drag her back. She started the engine, the rearview mirror filled with light. At first she thought it was the sun catching wrong. Then the lights multiplied. Headlights, multiple vehicles, moving with synchronized precision that civilian traffic didn't possess. She looked up. 10 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot in formation. They moved silently despite their size, spreading out to cover every exit. No lights flashing, no sirens, just methodical professional positioning that cut off escape routes with tactical efficiency. Her heart rate spiked. Her hands went still on the wheel. The SUVs stopped, engines running. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Just 10 black vehicles sitting idle in a parking lot, their dark windows revealing nothing. Then the doors opened. All of them, synchronized. Men in dark suits stepped out, different from the ones inside. These carried themselves with military bearing, not protective detail. Operators, the kind of people sent when the situation required capability beyond normal protocols. No, not now, not here. She said it to herself, to the compass, to the universe that seemed determined to deny her the quiet life she'd chosen. The lead agent approached her driver's window. He moved without aggression, but with absolute certainty. Knocked twice, polite but firm. She didn't roll down the window, didn't move, just sat there gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing in a world coming apart. The agent knocked again, gestured for her to lower the seat window. She did. 2 inches. Enough to hear him, not enough to suggest compliance. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Her voice came out flat. "I'm not going back." The agent's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, it's not a request, but you're not in trouble. Then what is this? He glanced back at the other vehicles, at the men standing at ready positions, at the hospital windows where faces pressed against glass to watch the scene unfold. Information above my clearance, ma'am. But we have orders to bring you back inside. Hospital security escorted me out. I'm terminated. I don't have access. That's been temporarily overridden. The agent's voice held a note that might have been respect. Please, it'll be easier if you cooperate. She looked at the vehicles surrounding her car, at the men positioned at every exit, at the hospital doors where more personnel were gathering. She counted exits and angles and possibilities with the automatic assessment of someone trained to evaluate tactical situations. There was no scenario where she drove away from this. She turned off the engine, pocketed the keys, took the compass and slipped it back into her scrubs, opened the door and stepped out. The agents formed a loose perimeter around her, not restraining, not threatening, just present, containing without confining. She walked between them toward the hospital entrance. Through the glass doors, she could see the crowd gathering. ER staff, administrative personnel, security, Dr. Holland, Nurse Tate, Maris Keld. All of them watching. Tate spoke to the person next to him. His voice carried through the open door. Oh my God, what did she do? Holland's expression mixed shock with something darker. She broke federal protocol. They're arresting her. But the agents weren't treating her like a suspect. She'd been arrested before during a training exercise. She knew what that looked like. This was different. The deference was subtle but present. The way they positioned themselves suggested protection more than detention. The doors opened. She walked through into a wall of staring faces. The crowd parted, not out of fear, out of uncertainty. No one knew how to react to this. She kept her eyes forward, didn't acknowledge the whispers, didn't respond to the stares, just walked with the same steady precision she'd used all day. The agents escorted her past the ER, past administration, into a wing of the hospital she'd never accessed. Private corridors, restricted signs, areas where normal staff didn't go. They stopped at a conference room. The lead agent opened the door, gestured for her to enter. Someone will be with you shortly. She walked in. The door closed behind her. Not locked, just closed. She was alone. The conference room was sterile, long table, 8 chairs, no windows. A camera in the corner, red light indicating it was active. She looked at it directly, then chose a chair facing the door with her back to the wall. Old habits. Always know your exits. Always position yourself defensively. Never let anyone approach from behind without seeing them first. She sat, folded her hands on the table, and waited. Her mind went through the possibilities. Federal investigation into unauthorized medical intervention, security breach protocols, classified patient requiring her silence. None of the options were good. All of them meant her carefully constructed civilian life was over. She counted ceiling tiles, old calming technique, 12 across, 8 deep, 96 total. The count settled her breathing, made the waiting tolerable. Through the door's small window, she could see movement in the corridor, hospital administrators rushing past, federal personnel directing traffic, phone calls being made. Whatever was happening had set off institutional panic. 45 minutes passed. She didn't move, didn't fidget, just sat with her hands folded and her eyes on the door, patient in the way someone becomes when waiting is a survival skill. The door opened. A man in naval dress uniform entered, 3 stars on his shoulder boards. Rear Admiral. His uniform was crisp, his bearing perfect, his eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. He closed the door behind him, stood there for a moment, studying her. She studied him back. Equal assessment. Then he sat across from her, folded his hands to mirror her position. It's been a long time, Petty Officer March. Her eyes closed, just for a second. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She'd hoped it wouldn't be today. In this building, after throwing away the life she'd spent 2 years building. When she opened her eyes again, her voice came out steady. I'm not a petty officer anymore, sir. I was discharged. The Admiral's expression didn't change. Medical separation doesn't erase service, March. Just ends active duty. What do you want, sir? He leaned back slightly. The posture shift suggested he was moving from formal assessment to something closer to conversation. You saved Admiral Garrett's life today. Do you know who he is? I saw the tattoo. I guessed. SEAL Team Command. His biometrics flatlined during a classified briefing 15 minutes before he was brought here. That triggered immediate response protocols. He tapped the table once. 10 of those vehicles outside. Federal protective details. Emergency medical response teams. All because his heart stopped. She said nothing. Waited for him to get to the point. Your handling of the situation was textbook special warfare medical protocol. Needle decompression at the correct angle for blast trauma. Intubation speed suggesting combat field experience. Assessment of wound patterns consistent with IED exposure. The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly. No civilian nurse has that skill set, March. You blew your cover the moment you moved. I wasn't trying to maintain cover, sir. He was dying. I know. That's why I'm here instead of someone less friendly. He pulled a tablet from his jacket, tapped it twice, turned it to face her. Your file came up the moment hospital surveillance flagged your intervention techniques. On the screen, a military service record, her photo, younger, in uniform. Text below, listing deployments, commendations, operational history. HM2, Evangeline March, Combat Medic, Task Force Poseidon. 3 tours, 15 commendations, then a gap. Then the words medical separation, honorable discharge, and a date from 2 years ago. Below that, one word in red, Istanbul. She looked away from the screen, her jaw set. That muscle tension that happened whenever anyone mentioned Istanbul. The Admiral turned the tablet back to himself. 3 tours with special warfare. Field medic for direct action teams. 15 lives saved under fire. Then Operation Nightingale, Istanbul, 2022. He paused. She said nothing. Her hands remained folded, but the knuckles were white. You pulled 2 wounded operators out of a vehicle destroyed by IED under active sniper fire. You kept them alive long enough for extraction. Both survived. You received a Navy Cross. She still said nothing. Then you filed for medical separation 6 months later. Trauma-related discharge. You wanted out. You wanted quiet. The Admiral's voice softened slightly. So you became a civilian nurse. Moved 3 times in 2 years. Kept to yourself. Stayed off any official radars. Until 3 weeks ago when you started working here. Why does that matter? Because Admiral Garrett wasn't at that briefing by accident. Neither were you at this hospital. He let that hang in the air between them. Her eyes snapped up. What does that mean? It means your name flagged in our system 3 weeks ago when your employment background check ran through federal databases. Former special warfare medic working trauma at a civilian hospital triggered a security review. We've been aware of your presence here. You've been watching me, monitoring. There's a difference. She leaned forward, anger finally cracking. Through her control. So, this was what? A test? See if the broken medic still has the skills? The Admiral's expression hardened. No. Garrett's cardiac event was real. But the fact that you were here when it happened was extremely fortunate. He paused. Sometimes fate is just good intelligence and preparedness. What are you asking me, sir? He stood, straightened his uniform jacket. The hospital wants you reinstated, with promotion. They've been strongly encouraged to make this happen. And if I refuse, then you walk away. Again. Go back to your apartment, pack your things, move to another city, find another hospital. Keep running from who you were. He moved toward the door. But Admiral Garrett woke up 30 minutes ago. He asked for you specifically. She stood slowly. What did he say? The Admiral opened the door, looked back at her. He said, "Find the angel who wouldn't let me quit. He wants to thank you himself," then added, "He also wants to offer you something, but I'll let him explain." That. The door opened wider. An agent stood in the corridor waiting to escort her. The Admiral stepped aside. One more thing, March. Garrett wasn't at that briefing to discuss routine operations. He was evaluating threat assessments for soft targets, civilian hospitals. This one specifically. There's been intelligence chatter suggesting an attack. Her face went still. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. You're saying someone knows I'm here? I'm saying your presence here isn't as anonymous as you thought. And neither was his. He gestured to the waiting agent. Time to go. He's waiting. She walked past the Admiral into the corridor. The agent fell into step beside her. They moved through restricted hallways back toward the public areas of the hospital, back toward the ER where her career had ended 90 minutes ago. The atrium below the ER was full. Staff had gathered. The word had spread. That nurse who got fired, the one the federal agents took, she's back. Everyone wanted to see what happened next. She descended the stairs slowly. All eyes tracked her movement. Whispers spread like ripples in water. Holland stood near the nurse's station, arms crossed, face unreadable. Tate watched from near the supply room, recognition dawning in his expression. Keld stood at attention, her military bearing from decades past suddenly visible. This was exposure, the opposite of everything she'd wanted when she'd left active duty, the opposite of the quiet, anonymous life she'd tried to build. But the man she'd saved was alive. That was what mattered. That was what always mattered, even when everything else fell apart. The agent guided her toward the surgical wing, toward whatever came next, toward Admiral Garrett and whatever offer he'd mentioned, toward a life that kept pulling her back no matter how far she ran. Behind her, the hospital crowd watched. Ahead of her, doors opened into unknown territory, and in her pocket, the compass needle pointed north, always north, toward something she couldn't see yet, but was walking toward anyway. If you've ever witnessed someone's quiet competence being dismissed, or if you've known someone whose past held more than they revealed, share your thoughts below. This is only the beginning. Consider staying for what happens when the door to that recovery room opens. The surgical wing occupied the hospital's eastern corridor. Restricted access. Key card required. The agent swiped them through 3 separate checkpoints, each guarded by more men in dark suits who tracked Evie with professional assessment. Not hostile, not friendly, just aware. The hallway smelled different from the ER. Less antiseptic, more mechanical. The filtered air of rooms kept sterile for operations where infection meant death. Her footsteps echoed against polished floors that reflected overhead lights like still water. Staff moved through the corridor with purpose. Surgeons in their scrubs, nurses checking monitors, anesthesiologists reviewing. Charts. They glanced at her as she passed, some with curiosity, others with recognition. Word had spread fast in a building where information moved like contagion. That's the nurse who saved the classified patient, the one they fired. Why is she here? The agent stopped at a recovery room door. Number 347. A guard stood outside. Not hospital security, military police. His uniform showed it clearly. He nodded to the agent escorting her, then opened the door without comment. Inside, the room held the standard equipment of post-operative care, monitors displaying vital signs and steady rhythm. IV stands with multiple bags of fluids and medications. A bed positioned to allow quick access from all sides. And in that bed, propped at a 45-degree angle, Admiral Marcus Garrett. He looked smaller than he had on the gurney. Older, the kind of aging that happens when trauma strips away the armor people wear. His face was pale beneath a tan that spoke to years in the sun, bandages wrapped. His chest. Tubes ran from his arms, but his eyes were clear and sharp when they found hers. The agent stepped back. "I'll be outside." The door closed with a soft click. Evie stood just inside, unsure of protocol. He was a flag officer. She was former enlisted medical. The hierarchy existed even after discharge, even in civilian clothes in a hospital room. Garrett gestured to a chair near the bed. His voice came out rough, damaged by the intubation tube. "Sit down, petty officer. That's an order." She sat, kept her spine straight, hands folded in her lap. The position she'd learned in service, at ease but ready. Garrett watched her for a long moment. His breathing was controlled, but she could hear the slight whistle that suggested chest trauma still healing. "You saved my life twice. Did you know that?" "Sir, Istanbul, 2022, Operation Nightingale. You pulled 2 wounded out of that vehicle after the IED hit. I was overseeing that operation from command. I watched the drone feed, watched you work under sniper fire for 8 minutes, keeping those men alive until extraction arrived." She remembered the heat, the smoke, the sound of rounds impacting around her while she worked, the weight of the first operator as she dragged him clear, the second one screaming because his leg was gone and she couldn't give him enough morphine without killing him. 8 minutes, that felt like 8 hours. I was doing my job, sir. You were doing more than that. Garrett shifted slightly, winced at the movement. I gave you a commendation after that operation. Do you remember what I said? You said I had unhesitant hands. I meant it. You didn't freeze, didn't panic, just worked. Same thing you did today. He gestured to his chest. I felt myself dying in that briefing room, felt my heart stop. Then I was here, and you were over me, and I knew somehow I'd be okay, because those hands don't hesitate. She looked down at her hands. They were steady now. They'd been steady when it mattered, but they shook, in quiet moments when no one watched, when the memories got too loud. Why did you leave, March? Medical separation papers said trauma-related discharge. What happened after Istanbul? She didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the filtered air between them. Outside the door she could hear muffled voices. Inside, only the steady beep of monitors marking his continued existence. I lost someone, sir. After Istanbul. Different operation. I couldn't save them. Filed separation 6 months later. Garrett's expression softened slightly, the kind of understanding that came from years of command and the weight of decisions that cost lives. We all lose people. It's the price of the work. I know, sir, but I paid enough. So you became a nurse, found a civilian hospital, tried to disappear. Yes, sir. Didn't work very well, did it? She met his eyes. 3 weeks, sir. That's how long my disappearing act lasted. Garrett reached for the cup of water on the bedside table. His hands shook, slightly. She moved without thinking, steadying the cup, helping him drink. The gesture was automatic, muscle memory from years of patient care. He nodded thanks, and she returned to her chair. You know why I was at that briefing today? He didn't wait for her answer. Threat assessment. Intelligence chatter picked up discussions of attacks on soft targets, civilian hospitals specifically, high casualty potential, maximum media impact, difficult to defend. Her stomach tightened. Which hospitals? Multiple cities. This one flagged because of its trauma designation and proximity to federal buildings. We were coordinating response protocols when I went down. And you think the timing was coincidental? His silence answered the question. She leaned forward. You think someone tried to kill you at this specific hospital on purpose. I think someone knew I'd be here. Knew when. Knew the briefing schedule. Garrett's voice dropped lower. And I think someone knew you were here too. The words landed, like physical blows. She processed the implications quickly. Former combat medic working at a hospital under threat assessment. Flag officer conducting briefing at same hospital. Cardiac event requiring immediate specialized medical intervention. Too many coincidences. Sir, I've been off the grid for 2 years. I don't use social media. I pay cash when possible. I moved 3 times. How would anyone know where I am? Federal background checks. Hospital employment verification runs through databases. Your fingerprints and service record exist in multiple systems. If someone was looking for former special warfare medical personnel in specific locations, they could find you. Why would anyone look? That's the question. Garrett shifted again, clearly uncomfortable but pushing through. 2 possibilities. 1, someone wanted me dead and chose a location where you'd be nearby to ensure I'd survive long enough to cause problems for them. 2, someone wanted to expose you, force you back into a situation where your skills would be undeniable. Both options made her skin crawl. Sir, I'm not an asset anymore. I'm a civilian nurse who just got fired. About that. The hospital administration has been informed that your termination was premature. You're being reinstated effective immediately, with promotion to senior trauma specialist and federal liaison designation. I didn't ask for that. Admiral's prerogative. You saved my life. That carries weight. His eyes hardened slightly. But there's more. The briefing I was conducting when I collapsed was about coordinated response protocols. We need medical personnel who can handle mass casualty situations, who have combat experience, who won't freeze when things go wrong. You want me to train staff. I want you to lead a program, crisis response for trauma hospitals, federal certification, direct pipeline to special operations medical community for expertise and best practices. You'd run it. She stood abruptly, moved to the window. Outside, the city spread in all directions. Normal life continuing in buildings and streets where people didn't think about coordinated attacks or threat assessments or the ways violence could erupt in spaces meant for healing. I left for a reason, sir. I can't go back to that world. I'm not asking you to deploy. I'm asking you to teach, to use what you learned to save more people. His voice carried command weight despite the weakness in his body. You were given skills most people never possess, skills bought with sacrifice and training. You can't just lock them away and pretend they don't exist. I've been pretending successfully for 2 years. No, you've been running. There's a difference. She turned to face him. Her jaw was set, eyes hard. And what happens when the next crisis hits? When someone recognizes me? When my past catches up again? Then you handle it, like you handled today. Garrett met her gaze without blinking. You're not broken, March. You're just tired. But tired doesn't mean useless, and it doesn't mean you get to waste what you are. The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. She'd been telling herself for 2 years that she was broken, that Istanbul had damaged something fundamental, that the cost of service had been too high. But standing in this room, looking at a man alive because her hands still knew what to do, the narrative felt less certain. Can I think about it? You can, but you already know your answer. You just need permission to say yes. He leaned back against the pillows, clearly exhausted. Go home. Rest. Come back tomorrow and we'll discuss details. But understand this. Whether you take the position or not, you're part of this now. The moment you save me, you entered the situation. People know you exist. People are asking questions. What people? The kind who pay attention to flag officers having cardiac events during classified briefings. The kind who wonder how a rookie nurse had special warfare-level medical skills. The kind who connect dots. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Be careful, March. Someone put you in this position. We just don't know who or why yet. A knock at the door interrupted them. The agent from outside entered. Sir, they're ready for you downstairs. The staff is assembled. Garrett nodded. Show her the way, sir. She stood at attention despite wearing civilian scrubs. Why are you helping me? Because you saved my life. Because you represent something the military needs more of. Because you remind me why I still do this work. He gestured to the door. And because I owe you. Istanbul, today. That debt matters. She didn't know what to say to that. So she nodded once and followed the agent out. The corridor back toward the main hospital was longer than she remembered. Or maybe time just moved differently when walking toward exposure. They passed through the surgical wing into administrative territory, past offices where decisions were made about budgets and policies, past conference rooms where careers were discussed and evaluated, past the machinery of institutional power that had fired her 2 hours ago and was about to reverse itself. The atrium opened below like an amphitheater, the hospital's central hub. Wide open space rising 3 stories, natural light from skylights above, and gathered throughout. Every staff member who wasn't currently treating a patient. Dr. Holland stood near the nurse's station, arms crossed, face uncertain. Nurse Tate was beside him, eyes bright with curiosity. Maris Keld stood separate from the others, her military bearing evident in the way she held herself. Administrator Gast stood near the back, face pale, flanked by board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. And throughout the space, federal agents. They lined the perimeter, stood at exits, created a presence that made it clear this wasn't a normal hospital gathering. The agent guided her to the top of the main staircase. Below, all eyes. Turned upward. The murmuring stopped. Silence fell like a physical weight. She recognized this feeling, standing before an assembled group waiting for information, for direction, for explanation. She'd felt it before when addressing units after combat operations, when briefing teams before missions, when standing in formation while citations were read. Her hand went to her pocket, found the compass. The small weight of it grounded her. A federal liaison stepped forward at the base of the stairs, naval officer she didn't recognize, commander rank. He held a tablet and spoke with the kind of voice trained to carry without shouting. At 14:47 hours today, Admiral Marcus Garrett of Naval Special Warfare Command suffered cardiac arrest during a classified briefing. He was transported to this facility under federal security protocols. The assembled staff listened in silence. Gast's face was ashen. A member of your staff, R.N. Evangeline March, violated chain of command to initiate emergency stabilization measures. The liaison's voice remained neutral, clinical. This action occurred during a federal security incident involving a classified patient. Gast moved forward slightly, clearly seeing vindication coming, which is why she was terminated for gross. The liaison cut him off with a look, which is why Admiral Garrett is alive. The words landed in the silence like dropped stones in still water. Ripples of understanding spread through the crowd. What this hospital administration did not know is that Ms. March is former United States Navy. Hospital Corpsman, 2nd Class. Special Warfare Combat Medic. 3 operational tours. 15 commendations for valor and medical excellence. The liaison looked up at her on the staircase. She served with distinction in multiple theaters, including combat zones in the Middle East and North Africa. She felt the eyes shift, reassessing. The rookie nurse who'd been fired for insubordination was something else entirely. The whispers started. Immediately, Dr. Holland's face showed shock and something that might have been embarrassment. Tate's expression was recognition, understanding finally dawning about the precision, the awareness, the competence that had seemed out of place. Nurse Keld's face showed something different. Respect. The kind of recognition that came from shared service. Her hand moved in a subtle gesture. Not quite a salute, but carrying the same weight. Ms. March acted on training and instinct. The liaison continued. She identified trauma patterns consistent with combat zone injuries. She performed emergency medical procedures with precision that saved Admiral Garrett's life. Her actions were not insubordination. They were exemplary medical response under crisis conditions. Gast tried again. But the protocols clearly state the protocols were inadequate for the situation. The liaison's voice hardened. Ms. March recognized what others missed because she has experience your staff does not possess. She saw a SEAL operator dying and responded accordingly. That response is the only reason we're having this conversation instead of a different one. The crowd shifted, understanding rippling through in stages. The nurses understood first. The immediate recognition that Evie had been working among them with capabilities they'd never suspected. The doctors followed, processing the implications of her diagnostic accuracy. The administrators came last, realizing the magnitude of their error. A figure stepped forward from the shadows near the wall. Rear Admiral from earlier. He moved to the center of the atrium, his dress uniform crisp and commanding. All eyes shifted to him. Petty Officer March served with distinction. His voice carried authority that made the liaison sound like a whisper. She deployed to high-risk zones where medical care meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She worked in conditions most people can't imagine, under fire, under pressure, under circumstances where hesitation costs lives. He turned to look up at her on the staircase. She met his eyes, held the gaze. Today she demonstrated the same capability that earned her commendations in service. She saw what needed to be done and did it without waiting for permission. Without concern for her own position, without hesitation. The Admiral moved closer to the base of the stairs. In recognition of her service, both past and present, and on behalf of the United States Navy and Admiral Garrett specifically, I want to offer formal gratitude. He came to attention, raised his hand in a perfect salute. The gesture froze time. A rear admiral saluting a former enlisted medic in the middle of a civilian hospital. The incongruity was stunning. The meaning was clear. Evie's body moved before her mind caught up. 30 months since discharge, but muscle memory ran deeper than conscious thought. She straightened, came to attention, returned the salute with precision that came from years of practice. The Admiral held the salute for 3 full seconds, then dropped it. Around the atrium, movement rippled. The federal agents along the perimeter came to attention. One by one, those in military service rendered salutes. Naval officers, Marine guards, even the Army MPS stationed at the security checkpoints. Nurse Keld stepped forward from the crowd. Her hand came up in a salute that showed decades-old training. Former Army nurse. Evie could see it now in how she carried herself. Keld held the salute with the kind of respect that transcended branch rivalry. Tate stared. Holland couldn't look at her. Gast stood frozen, finally understanding how badly he'd miscalculated. The Admiral's voice rang out again. Ms. March, on behalf of Admiral Garrett and the Naval Special Warfare community, thank you for your service. Then, and now. She found her voice. It came out steady, despite everything. It's what we do, sir. No. His reply was immediate. It's what you do. Not everyone has the courage to act when it matters. Not everyone carries that burden well. The salutes lowered, the formal moment passed, but the weight of it remained. The liaison stepped forward again. Ms. March is hereby reinstated to St. Catherine's Trauma Center with immediate effect. She is promoted to Senior Trauma Specialist and designated as Federal Medical Liaison. Her employment record will reflect exemplary performance, and her termination will be expunged. Gast tried to speak. Found no words. One of the board members touched his arm, pulled him back. Furthermore, the liaison wasn't finished. Administrator Vernon Gast is suspended pending investigation into his handling of today's incident. The hospital board will review protocols for emergency medical response during federal security situations. The crowd's attention shifted to Gast. His face went from pale to red, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. The federal government had spoken. His authority meant nothing against that. Wait. The Admiral addressed the staff directly. This hospital is designated as a federal priority facility for crisis response training. Ms. March will oversee implementation of new protocols. Your cooperation is expected and appreciated. He turned and walked toward the administrative wing. The other officers followed. The agents began to disperse. The formal assembly was over. Evie stood on the staircase as the crowd below began to break apart. Whispers spreading like wildfire. People glancing at her and away, processing, reassessing everything they thought they knew about the quiet rookie who'd kept her head down for 3 weeks. Tate approached the base of the stairs, looked up at her. He didn't speak, just nodded once. Respect without words. Dr. Holland followed, stopped a few steps away. His voice came out quiet. I owe you an apology for today, for dismissing your observations, for not seeing what you were. She descended the stairs slowly, came level with him. You owe me. Attention next time I flag something. That's what matters. He extended his hand. She shook it. The grip was firm, professional. The beginning of something different than what they'd had before. Maris Keld waited until Holland moved away, then stepped close enough to speak quietly. Army Nurse Corps, 2 tours, Iraq. I knew there was something about you. You didn't say anything. Wasn't my place. You clearly wanted privacy. Keld's eyes held understanding. But I'm glad they figured it out. We need people like you, people who've seen things, who know what real crisis looks like. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just teach these kids what you know. Make sure they're ready when things go bad. Because they will. Keld's voice carried certainty born from experience. They always do. She walked away, left Evie standing in the atrium as staff flowed around her. Some stopped to introduce themselves again, to shake her hand, to ask questions about her service. Others kept their distance, uncertain how to process this new information. An agent approached, the same one who'd escorted her earlier. Admiral Garrett requests you stop by his room before you leave. He has something for you. She followed him back through the corridors, back to room 347, back to the man whose life had changed hers twice now. Once in Istanbul when he'd given her a commendation. Once today when his survival had exposed everything she'd been hiding. Garrett was sitting up more now, color returning to his face. He gestured to the bedside table when she entered. Open the top drawer. She did. Inside lay a wooden box, small, brass corners, lock on the front. Her breath caught. That's from my apartment. Federal sweep flagged it during security protocols. We had to verify contents. His voice held apology. Your privacy was compromised. I'm sorry for that. But they needed to ensure there were no security risks. She lifted the box, felt its familiar weight. What did you find inside? A Navy Cross, photographs of your unit, dog tags, and a letter you never sent. He watched her face carefully. The letter wasn't read beyond confirming it wasn't a security threat. That's still yours. She held the box close. The lock had been opened. Someone had seen inside, had seen the things she kept locked away because opening them meant remembering and remembering meant hurting. I know what Istanbul cost you. Garrett's voice was gentle. I know losing someone under your care is what drove you out. I won't ask you to talk about it, but I will tell you this. Locking away your past doesn't heal it. It just keeps the wounds fresh. Sir, you're good at this work, March. Better than good. Exceptional. But you're carrying weight that's bending you. He gestured to the box. Whatever's in there, whatever you're holding on to, it's not helping you. It's just making you smaller. She said nothing. Couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. Take the position, run the training program, use what you learned to save more people. And maybe in doing that, you'll find a way to forgive yourself for the one you couldn't save. The words cut deep, true and painful and impossible to argue against. I'll think about it, sir. Good. Now get out of here. I need rest and you need time to process. Come back tomorrow, we'll discuss details. He closed his eyes, dismissed but with kindness. She left with the box under her arm, walked through the hospital toward the exit. Staff who had watched her escorted out in shame now nodded as she passed. The narrative had shifted. The rookie who'd broken protocol was now the decorated veteran who'd saved a flag officer's life. The late afternoon sun hit hard when she stepped outside. She stood in the parking lot where 2 hours ago she'd sat in her car thinking her life was over, where federal vehicles had surrounded her, where everything had changed. Her car sat in the same spot, waiting, patient. She got in, set the wooden box on the passenger seat, started the engine. The compass came. Out of her pocket, she held it while the engine idled. The needle pointed north, always north. But maybe north wasn't the right direction anymore. Maybe the direction she needed was back inside, back to the work, back to using the skills she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. She looked at the hospital building, thought about Admiral Garrett recovering in room 347, about Dr. Holland learning humility, about Nurse Keld recognizing a fellow veteran, about Tate finally understanding what he'd been seeing for 3 weeks, about a training program that didn't exist yet, but would because someone thought she could build it. The wooden box sat closed on the passenger seat. Inside, her past. The Navy Cross she'd earned in blood and fire. The photographs of people who'd served beside her. The dog tags that had hung around her neck through 3 deployments. The letters she'd written to someone who'd never read it because they hadn't survived long enough. She'd locked those things away thinking it would help. Thinking distance from the past would create space for healing. But Garrett was right. Locking things away just preserved them, kept them from changing, kept her from changing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then thought better of it. Ms. March? This is Commander Richardson. We met briefly today. I'm coordinating the Federal Liaison Program Admiral Garrett mentioned. Yes, sir. I wanted to reach out personally, express gratitude for your actions today, and discuss next steps. Would you be available tomorrow afternoon for a planning session? She looked at the hospital, at the box, at the compass still pointing north. Yes, sir. I'll be there. Excellent. 1400 hours, conference room 3. We'll go over program structure, resource allocation, and timeline. Bring questions. This is your program. We're just providing support. Understood. One more thing. Richardson's voice shifted slightly. Admiral Garrett wasn't exaggerating. The threat assessment is real. We have credible intelligence suggesting coordinated attacks on civilian hospitals, high casualty targeting. We need people like you preparing facilities to respond. This isn't just administrative work. It's critical infrastructure defense. I understand, sir. Good. See you tomorrow. The call ended. She sat in the car holding a compass and staring at a building where her carefully constructed new life had exploded and reformed into something she didn't recognize yet. 2 years of running, 2 years of trying to be someone else, someone smaller, someone who didn't carry the weight of combat medical training and the trauma that came with it. Someone who could blend into civilian life and disappear. It hadn't worked. Maybe it was never going to work. Maybe some things you are don't let you become something else. Maybe the skills and experiences and losses that shaped you can't be locked in a wooden box and forgotten. She put the car in gear, drove out of the parking lot. The SUVs were gone. The federal agents dispersed. The crisis was over, and life was returning to normal. Except nothing about her life was normal anymore, and possibly never would be again. The apartment felt different when she entered. The same sparse furniture, the same minimal decoration, but the space felt less like a hiding place and more like a way station. Temporary, not a home, just a place to sleep between whatever came next. She set the wooden box on the dresser next to the spot where it had been before federal agents had opened it and cataloged its contents. She unlocked it slowly. The key was on her keychain, carried everywhere, but never used until now. Inside, the Navy Cross sat in its presentation case. The ribbon was red, white, and blue. The medal itself was bronze. She'd received it at a ceremony she barely remembered because the wounds from Istanbul were still too fresh. The citation had read some variation of extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty. The words felt hollow at the time. They still did. Beneath the medal, photographs, her unit. Faces she'd trained with, deployed with, survived with. Most were alive, some were not. She didn't look at those too closely. Couldn't yet. The dog tags clinked softly when she lifted them. Standard military issue. Her name, service number, blood type, religious preference. They'd hung around her neck through 3 deployments. Had been there when she'd pulled wounded operators out of destroyed vehicles. Had been there when she'd performed emergency surgery in the field, with bullets impacting around her. Had been there when she'd held someone's hand while they died because there was nothing else she could do. At the bottom, an envelope, white, unsealed. She'd written it 2 years ago. Had been writing versions of it for months before that. A letter to someone who'd never read it because they were gone. She didn't open the envelope, wasn't ready for that yet. But she didn't lock it away again either, just left it, visible, present. A reminder that some things couldn't be hidden forever. Her phone buzzed again. Text message this time. Unknown number, but she recognized the format. Military Communication Protocol. Message read, March. Garrett here. Got your number from personnel file. Don't be alarmed, just wanted to say thank you again, and to tell you something I didn't say earlier. Someone tried to kill me today. We don't know who or why yet, but they chose this hospital. They chose timing when you'd be present. That's not coincidence. Be careful, watch your 6, more soon. She read it twice. Let the implications settle. Someone had tried to kill a flag officer. Someone knew she worked at this hospital. Someone had orchestrated events to create a situation where her skills would be exposed. The question was why, and the answer mattered, because if someone was manipulating events, they had resources and planning capability that suggested serious intent. She typed a response. Understood, sir. Bulazi, remain vigilant. The reply came immediately. Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be busy. And March, I'm glad you're still in the fight. We need people like you. Now more than ever. She set the phone down, looked at the box on the dresser, at the compass lying beside it, at the apartment that felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. Someone knew where she was. Someone had put pieces in motion. Someone was playing a game where flag officers and combat medics were chess pieces being moved toward outcomes she couldn't see yet. But she was done running, done hiding, done pretending she was someone else. Tomorrow she'd go back to the hospital, back to the work, back to using the skills she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. And while she did that, she'd watch, pay attention, notice the details others missed, because someone out there had exposed her deliberately, had forced her hand, had brought her past crashing into her present for a reason, and she was going to find out why. If someone you know has ever had their past catch up with them in unexpected ways, or if you've seen hidden capability forced to surface under pressure, share your story in the comments. Part 3 reveals what happens when exposure becomes recognition, and when one person's courage forces an entire institution to see differently. Dawn came at 4:47 a.m. The alarm didn't wake her because she was already sitting on the edge of her bed, feet flat against cold hardwood, spine straight. But this morning felt different. The routine was the same. The apartment was the same. She was not. The wooden box sat open on the dresser, Navy Cross visible in its case, photographs arranged beside it instead of hidden inside, dog tags hanging on a hook she'd installed after returning from the hospital yesterday. The envelope with the unread letter remained at the bottom of the box, but it wasn't locked away anymore. Present, acknowledged, no longer a secret she carried alone. She performed her morning, routine with the same precision. 50 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, stretching in the sequence that had become muscle memory. But when she counted, she didn't whisper anymore. The words came out clear. Arabic numbers from training exercises years ago. A language she'd used in the field, part of who she was instead of something to hide. The compass came out of the drawer. She held it, watching the needle settle north. Then she clipped it to her keychain instead of hiding it in her pocket. Visible. A symbol she'd earned the right to carry openly. Coffee brewed while she stood at the window. The same joggers passed. The same delivery truck idled. But she wasn't watching for threats anymore. Just observing. The difference was subtle but significant. Watching suggested fear. Observing suggested awareness. She was done being afraid. The walk to St. Catherine's took 18 minutes. She wore dark blue scrubs this time, not the pale blue of a rookie. The darker shade designated senior, trauma staff. The badge clipped to her chest read differently now. E. March, RN, Senior Trauma Specialist. Beneath it, a second badge. Federal Medical Liaison. The official designation that made her something between civilian and military. Between nurse and operator. Something new that she hadn't figured out how to be yet, but was willing to learn. The staff entrance felt familiar now. 3 weeks ago, it had been foreign. Yesterday, it had been a gauntlet. Today, it was just a door. She swiped her badge and entered. The ER at morning shift change moved with its usual controlled chaos, but heads turned when she walked in. Not with curiosity anymore, with recognition. Some nodded, others offered quick greetings. A few stepped aside with something that looked like deference. The story had spread through the hospital like wildfire. Former Navy combat medic. 3 tours, 15 commendations. Saved a flag officer's life. The details had been embellished in places, but the core truth remained. Nurse Keld stood at the central station, looked up when Evie approached, nodded with the kind of respect that came from shared understanding. Morning March. Commander Richardson is waiting for you in conference room 3. 1400 hours meeting got moved to 0800. Something about urgency. Understood. Thank you. And March. Keld's voice dropped slightly. Thank you for what you did. For all of it. We needed someone like you here. We just didn't know it yet. The words carried weight. Acknowledgement without ceremony. The kind of gratitude that mattered because it came from someone who understood what service cost. Conference room 3 was in the administrative wing, the same area where she'd been held yesterday while federal agents decided what to do with her. But walking these corridors felt different now, not as a person being contained, as someone with purpose and authority. Commander Richardson stood when she entered. Naval officer, mid-40s, the kind of bearing that suggested submarine duty or surface warfare. He extended his hand. Ms. March, thank you for coming early. We have developments that require immediate attention. She shook his hand. What kind of developments? He gestured to a chair, pulled a tablet from his briefcase. Intelligence came in overnight. The threat we discussed yesterday is more specific than we thought. We have actionable information suggesting coordinated attacks planned for 3 hospitals. This one is primary target. Her stomach tightened. When? Timeline is unclear. Could be weeks, could be days. We're implementing security protocols, but we need your expertise on medical response, mass casualty preparation, triage procedures under active threat conditions, trauma management when normal resources are compromised. You want me to prepare this hospital for a war zone. I want you to prepare this hospital to save as many lives as possible when the worst happens. His voice carried urgency without panic. You've worked in combat, zones. You know what trauma looks like when it's intentional, when it's designed to maximize casualties. We need that knowledge translated into civilian hospital protocols. She looked at the tablet he'd set on the table, saw diagrams of the hospital layout, threat assessment models, casualty projections, the kind of planning that happened when violence was coming and the only question was how to survive it. What resources do I have? Whatever you need. Personnel, equipment, training time, federal budget allocation. Admiral Garrett gave this program Priority 1 classification. That means doors open, obstacles disappear. You ask, we provide. She thought about the ER staff, about Dr. Holland who dismissed her expertise, About Tate, who'd been curious but uncertain. About Keld, who'd recognized something familiar. About all the nurses and doctors and technicians who went to work every day thinking they were safe in a hospital that existed to save lives, not defend against attacks designed. To take them, I'll need access to all department heads, trauma, surgical, emergency, intensive care. I'll need authority to modify protocols, and I'll need people to trust me even when what I'm asking sounds insane. Done. Richardson pulled out official documentation, federal authorization. Your signature gives you operational authority over medical crisis response at this facility. Hospital administration answers to you on these matters. Department heads report to you. You have full autonomy within the scope of this program. She read the document carefully. The language was precise. The authority was extensive. She would effectively be running parallel command structure within the hospital. Civilian chain of command for normal operations. Her authority for crisis response. The potential for conflict was enormous. What about Administrator Gast, suspended pending investigation? Richardson's voice was flat. He's being evaluated for his handling of the Garrett incident. If he returns, he does so with clear understanding that federal liaison operations are outside his authority. She picked up the pen, stared at the signature line. This was it. The moment where she stopped pretending to be just a nurse and acknowledged what she really was, what she'd always been. Someone trained for crisis, someone who functioned in chaos, someone whose value emerged when everything went wrong. She signed, Richardson countered, filed the document in his briefcase. Welcome to federal service, Ms. March. Your country appreciates your willingness to serve again. I never really stopped serving, sir. I just tried pretending I had. He smiled slightly. I know the feeling. Retirement lasted 6 months for me before they pulled me back. Some people are built for this work. We don't do well in peacetime. Is that what this is? Peacetime? His smile faded. No. This is the space between impacts, when we know something's coming, but don't know when or how. It's worse than combat in some ways. The waiting, the preparation, the knowledge that you're racing against a clock you can't see. Then we better move fast. They spent 3 hours going over protocols. She outlined training requirements, identified gaps in current procedures, explained triage systems used in combat zones where resources were limited and decisions had to be made about who got treatment first, based on survival probability. It was brutal, clinical, the kind of medicine that saved the most lives but required accepting that some people would die because helping them meant others would die too. Richardson listened, took notes, asked questions that suggested he understood the complexity. When she finished, he leaned back. This is going to be controversial. Civilian medical ethics don't always align with battlefield triage. I know. But if the attack happens and we're not ready, a lot more people die. Uncomfortable preparation beats comfortable catastrophe. Agreed. He stood. Start today. Begin with trauma department. Staff, work your way through the hospital. You have 60 days to implement baseline protocols. After that, we drill, test the systems, find the failures before they matter. 60 days isn't much time. It's what we have. He moved toward the door, stopped. One more thing. Admiral Garrett is being released today. He's requested you be present when he leaves, says he has something to give you. She nodded. I'll be there. Richardson left. She sat alone in the conference room, looking at training materials and protocols, and the weight of responsibility she'd just accepted. This was real, not theoretical, not distant. Real people would live or die based on how well she did this job. The wooden box at home held a Navy Cross earned for keeping people alive under fire. Now she had a chance to earn something similar. Not a medal, but the knowledge that when crisis came, this hospital would be ready. That the training and preparation and difficult decisions she was about to make would save lives. She stood, gathered the materials, walked toward the trauma department to begin. 3 weeks passed in accelerated time, the kind of compression that happened when purpose replaced uncertainty, when every day mattered because the clock was running and the deadline was unknown. The trauma department meeting room became her operational headquarters. Whiteboards covered in diagrams and flow charts and decision trees. Training schedules posted on every available surface, equipment lists, personnel assignments. The organized chaos of building something from nothing under pressure. Dr. Holland showed up to the first training session, skeptical. left it pale and shaken. She'd walked them through mass casualty triage, shown them how to categorize wounded into immediate, delayed, minimal, and expectant. That last category was the hardest. Expectant meant likely to die regardless of intervention. In a mass casualty event with limited resources, expectant patients received comfort care only. Resources went to those who could be saved. Holland had challenged her. "We don't give up on patients." She'd met his eyes without flinching. In a normal day, no. In a mass casualty event with 50 wounded and 5 doctors, yes. You give up on the ones who can't be saved to save the ones who can. It's brutal. It's necessary. And if you can't do it when the moment comes, you'll watch people die who didn't have to. The room had gone silent, the reality sinking in. This wasn't theoretical medicine. This was combat triage brought to civilian hospitals because someone had decided hospitals were valid targets. Tate adapted faster than most. His curiosity served him well. He asked questions, took notes, practiced procedures until his hands moved with the kind of precision that saved seconds. And seconds mattered when people were bleeding. Keld became her deputy. The older nurse's military experience made her invaluable for training staff who'd never worked under pressure. She knew how to break down complex procedures into simple steps, how to drill until actions became automatic, how to prepare people for chaos without overwhelming them. The drills started in week 2, simulated mass casualty events, actors playing wounded, fake blood, chaos manufactured to test systems. The first drill was a disaster, confusion, delayed responses, resources misallocated. People froze or panicked or forgot their training. The second drill was better, the third better still. By the 5th drill, the trauma team moved with coordinated efficiency. Not perfect, but functional. Ready enough to make a difference when it mattered. Security changed throughout the hospital. Federal agents became permanent fixtures, not obvious, but present. Men and women in suits or scrubs who moved differently than medical staff, who positioned themselves at choke points and exits, who watched with the kind of awareness that suggested training beyond civilian security. Richardson checked in weekly, reviewed progress, provided resources, ran interference with hospital administration when department heads pushed back against the changes. His support made the impossible merely difficult. Admiral Garrett sent messages periodically, updates from his recovery, encouragement for the work, questions about progress. She responded with brief reports, professional, distant, but grateful for his interest. Her apartment changed too. The wooden box remained open on the dresser. Photographs stayed visible. Dog tags hung on their hook. But new items appeared. Training materials stacked on the small desk she'd purchased, a laptop for writing protocols, a phone that buzzed with messages at all hours because crisis preparation didn't respect normal schedules. The compass stayed on her keychain, visible, a reminder of navigation, of finding direction when paths weren't clear, of the promise she'd made to herself to stop running and start moving towards something instead of away from everything. She still woke at 4:47 a.m., still performed her routine with precision, but the routine expanded. After the physical training, she reviewed schedules, checked messages, prepared for the day's training sessions. The work consumed her in ways nursing never had. Because this wasn't just treatment, this was preparation. Building capability before crisis struck, creating readiness that would matter when chaos arrived. The hospital staff's perception of her shifted gradually. The rookie who'd been fired became the veteran who'd been vindicated, then the trainer who demanded excellence, then the liaison who commanded respect. The transformation happened in small moments, in nods of acknowledgement, in deference to her expertise, in the way people listened when she spoke because her words carried weight earned through experience they couldn't imagine. 3 weeks after signing the federal authorization, Admiral Garrett returned for his follow-up appointment. She was notified he'd requested she be present during the examination. Not required, requested. The distinction mattered. The cardiology suite was on the 3rd floor. Private examination rooms for follow-up care. She arrived 10 minutes early, found Garrett already there, sitting on the examination table in hospital gown, looking healthier than he had 3 weeks ago. Color had returned to his face. The hollowness around his eyes had filled in. He looked like a man who'd survived death and emerged stronger for it. He smiled when she entered. "There's my guardian angel. How's the program going?" "Making progress, sir. Trauma team is trained. We're expanding to surgical and emergency departments next week. 60-day deadline looks achievable. Good. The briefing I was conducting when I collapsed finally happened yesterday, without the cardiac arrest interruption this time." His smile faded. "The threat is real, March. Multiple sources confirm planning for coordinated hospital attacks. We're hardening targets, increasing security. But medical preparedness is critical. We'll be ready, sir. I know you will. That's why I recommended you." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I have something to discuss." She sat, waited. Garrett pulled an envelope from his belongings on the side table. "This is official offer for permanent position. Federal Medical Crisis Response Coordinator. You'd oversee programs at multiple hospitals, train teams, develop protocols, report directly to Naval Medical Command, with liaison to Department of Homeland Security." She took the envelope, felt its weight. Inside was a job offer that would make her crisis preparation work permanent. National scope instead of single hospital. Career instead of temporary assignment. "This is a significant commitment, sir." "It is. It's also recognition that you're exceptionally good at this work. The Surgeon General specifically requested you after reviewing your program here. That doesn't happen often." "What about my service record? Medical separation, trauma discharge?" "Irrelevant. You've demonstrated capability under pressure. Your past matters less than your present performance." He leaned forward slightly. "But you need to decide if this is what you want, if you're ready to fully return to this world, not as operator, but as someone who prepares others to handle what you've experienced." She opened the envelope, read the offer, the position, the salary, the responsibilities, the scope. It was everything she'd walked away from 2 years ago, except transformed. Not frontline trauma, but systemic preparation. Not individual lives saved in the moment, but capability built to save thousands when crisis struck. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. No deadline. But understand that whether you take this position or not, you've already changed things here. This hospital is more ready because of you. That matters." The cardiologist entered before she could respond. Began Garrett's examination. She stood to leave, but he gestured for her to stay. So she stood, against the wall while the doctor checked his heart, reviewed his medications, declared him recovering well, cleared for light duty, restrictions on strenuous activity. Follow-up in 6 weeks. When the doctor left, Garrett dressed slowly. His movements showed the care of someone still healing. She helped him with his shirt without being asked, the gesture automatic from years of patient care. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "Taking care of people. You always were. It's what I was trained to do." "No, it's who you are. The training just gave you better tools." He finished dressing, turned to face her. "I've seen a lot of medical personnel. Some are technically proficient but lack compassion. Others care deeply but lack skill. You have both. That's rare. That's valuable. That's why I want you in this role." She helped him with his jacket, a flag officer accepting help from a former enlisted medic. The moment felt strange and right simultaneously. "I'll review the offer carefully, sir." "Good." He moved toward the door, stopped. "One more thing. The letter in your box, the one you never sent, have you read it yet?" "No, sir." "Why not?" "Because reading it makes it real. As long as it's unread, I can pretend there's still something unsaid, some communication that might matter. Reading it means accepting that conversation is over. The conversation was over when they died, March. Reading the letter won't change that, but it might help you close that chapter." He looked at her with understanding that came from command experience and the burden of decisions. You can't carry unopened letters forever. Eventually you have to face what's written. "I know, sir." He left with an aide. She stood in the empty examination room, thinking about letters and wooden boxes and the things people carried that weighed nothing but felt impossibly heavy. Her shift ended at 6 p.m. She walked out of the hospital into early spring evening. The days were getting longer, lighter. The city felt different, as winter released its grip, or maybe she felt different and projected that onto the world around her. She drove home, parked, sat in the car for a moment before going inside. The wooden box waited. The letter waited. The decision about Garrett's offer waited. Everything waited while she figured out who she was becoming in the space between who she'd been and who she might be. Inside the apartment, she made the same French press coffee, stood at the same window. But the ritual felt different now. Not hiding, just being. The wooden box sat open on the dresser. She approached it slowly, reached for the envelope at the bottom, held it without opening. The paper was standard, white, unsealed because she'd never finished it enough to seal it. The person it was addressed to had died before she could decide if the words mattered. She sat on the edge of her bed, opened the envelope, pulled out 2 sheets of paper covered in her handwriting, the letter she'd started writing after Istanbul, after losing someone under her care, after making the decision to leave military service because carrying that weight was breaking her. The letter began without preamble. I should have been faster. I should have seen the secondary device. I should have pulled you clear before it detonated. I should have done 1,000 things differently and you'd still be alive. She read the words she'd written 2 years ago, read the guilt and anger and grief poured onto paper, because speaking it aloud would have broken her completely. Read the catalog of should-haves and could-haves and if-onlys that haunted her sleep and waking hours. The letter ended without conclusion. Just stopped mid-sentence because she'd put it down and never picked it back up, because finishing it meant accepting there was nothing left to say, that no amount of words would change what happened. That guilt was just weight she carried without purpose. She read it twice, then folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, but didn't return it to the box. Instead, she stood, walked to the small kitchen, held the envelope over the sink. For 2 years she'd carried this letter, this expression of guilt and grief and responsibility for something she couldn't have prevented. Carrying it hadn't helped, hadn't healed, hadn't changed anything except making her smaller under the weight. She lit a match, held the flame to the corner of the envelope, watched it catch, watched fire consume paper and ink and words that needed to burn because holding them was destroying her. The envelope curled and blackened. The letter inside burned. The words disappeared into smoke and ash. When nothing remained but fragments, she washed them down the sink. Let water carry away what fire had transformed. She stood there for a long moment, feeling lighter, feeling grief still present but not crushing, feeling like maybe Garrett was right. The conversation had ended when they died. The letter hadn't mattered except as weight she'd chosen to carry, and now she was choosing to put it down. The next morning came at 4:47 a.m. She woke on her own, performed her routine. But when she looked at the wooden box, it felt different, still present, still important, but not containing secrets anymore, just holding memories, evidence of service, proof of survival. She took the Navy Cross from its case, held the medal in her palm. It was heavier than it looked, bronze star with anchor and eagle, ribbons striped in red, white, and blue. She'd received it for pulling 2 wounded operators from a destroyed vehicle under sniper fire in Istanbul, for keeping them alive through an 8-minute extraction, for doing her job under conditions that should have killed her. She'd locked it away because looking at it hurt, because it represented a moment when she'd succeeded and reminded her of the times she'd failed. But medals weren't just for success. They were evidence of trying, of continuing when stopping would be easier, of choosing action over paralysis. She hung the medal on the wall beside her dog tags, visible, acknowledged, part of who she was instead of something to hide. The photograph of her unit came next. She'd kept it face down in the box. Now she propped it on the dresser where she could see it, young faces looking back at her, some alive, some gone, all part of her story, all worthy of being remembered instead of locked away. When she left for work that morning, her apartment looked different, less like a hiding place, more like a home. Small, minimal, but containing evidence of a life lived instead of a life fled. The hospital had changed too over 3 weeks. Security was visible, but not overwhelming. Staff moved with awareness that hadn't existed before. Training had created capability. Drills had built confidence. The building felt different, harder, more ready. Not a fortress, but no longer soft target either. She spent the morning running another drill, simulated active threat, mass casualties. Chaos. Designed to test systems and people, the trauma team performed well. Triage happened efficiently, resources deployed appropriately. Communication stayed clear despite the manufactured confusion. Holland ran the medical response. She observed, took notes, offered feedback after. He listened without defensiveness, had learned that her expertise came from experience he lacked, that accepting guidance wasn't weakness, that pride mattered less than readiness. Tate approached during lunch break, brought coffee, sat across from her in the small break room. "Question," he said, "the training, the protocols, the constant drilling. Do you really think something's going to happen?" "Yes." "When?" "Unknown, could be tomorrow, could be months from now, could be never." She sipped her coffee. "But if it happens and we're not ready, people die who shouldn't. That possibility makes the preparation worth it. Must be hard, living like that. Always waiting for disaster. I lived like that for 3 years on deployment. Waiting is the hardest part. But the alternative is being unprepared. I've seen what happens when people aren't ready. I won't let it happen here if I can prevent it." Tate nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're teaching us this. Even if it's uncomfortable. That's how you know it's working. Comfort doesn't prepare you for crisis. Discomfort does." He left her alone with her coffee and her thoughts. Through the break room window, she could see the ER, busy with normal traumas, car accidents, construction injuries, heart attacks, the routine emergencies that filled trauma centers every day, normal medicine, normal crisis, the kind they were equipped to handle. But abnormal crisis was coming. The intelligence said so. The threat assessments confirmed it. Someone had decided civilian hospitals were valid targets, had planned coordinated attacks designed to maximize casualties and create terror. And she was one of a handful of people in the country preparing medical facilities to respond. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed her. 2 years ago, it would have. But now it felt different. Not burden, purpose, not weight, direction, the skills she'd earned through service, the training that had cost her so much, the experience that had broken and reformed her. All of it mattered. All of it had value. All of it was being used to save lives before the crisis even began. Her phone buzzed. Message from Richardson. Conference call in 20 minutes. National coordination briefing. Updates on threat assessment and timeline. She finished her coffee, headed to her makeshift office in the trauma conference room, joined the call, listened to updates from hospitals in 3 cities. Threat level elevated. Intelligence suggested timing moving closer. All facilities increasing readiness. The call ended with Richardson addressing her directly. "Your program is setting the standard march. Other hospitals are using your protocols. Your training methods, you've created a model that's being replicated nationally. That's significant impact. Just trying to save lives, sir. You're succeeding. Keep pushing. We're running out of time." The call disconnected. She sat in the conference room, surrounded by whiteboards and training schedules, and the evidence of 3 weeks of intensive work. Impact, national model, standard setting. The words felt strange. She'd been trying to prepare one hospital, hadn't realized the work was spreading. But that's how change happened. One person doing something well, others noticing, replicating, expanding, individual action becoming systemic change, the same way individual service became collective security. The same way one medic keeping people alive under fire contributed to mission success that mattered beyond the immediate moment. She pulled out Garrett's offer letter, read it again with fresh understanding. Federal Medical Crisis Response Coordinator, national scope, systemic impact. The position would let her do for multiple hospitals what she'd done here: build readiness, train teams, create capability before crisis demanded it. She thought about the wooden box at home, about the Navy Cross hanging on her wall, about dog tags displayed instead of hidden, about photographs visible instead of locked away, about a letter burned because carrying it wasn't helping. She thought about the last 2 years, running from her past, trying to be someone smaller, someone who didn't carry weight or responsibility or the burden of capability. It hadn't worked, because you couldn't unmake what you were, couldn't unlearn what you knew, couldn't pretend skills didn't exist just because using them hurt. She picked up her phone, composed an email to Admiral Garrett. "Sir, reviewed the offer. Accept position contingent on completing current assignment here. Timeline 60 days to full transition. Request authority to maintain St. Catherine's liaison role, part-time, post-transition. This hospital matters. Want to see the program through. She hit send before doubt could stop her. The decision was made. Forward instead of away. Purpose instead of hiding. Using what she was instead of pretending to be something else. The response came within minutes. Accepted. Your terms approved. Welcome back to Federal Service, Commander March. Your commission papers will arrive shortly. Well done. Commander. Naval rank she'd never held in active service. Medical officers were commissioned, corpsmen were enlisted, but federal medical coordinators needed rank for authority. Commander gave her standing to work with hospital administration and military commands. Made her part of the system she'd left. She stared at the email. Commander March. The words felt foreign, but less foreign than they would have 2 years ago, or even 3 weeks ago. She'd changed. The work had changed her. Purpose had rebuilt what grief had broken. The hospital around her continued its routine operations. People were treated. Lives were saved. Normal medicine in normal times. But underneath the routine, readiness was building. Capability was forming. And when the crisis came, this hospital would respond with efficiency born from preparation instead of chaos born from surprise. She stood, gathered her materials, headed back to the ER for afternoon training session. Work continued, always continued. Because crisis didn't wait for convenient timing. Preparation happened in stolen moments and compressed schedules and the spaces between normal operations. As she walked through the corridors, staff nodded. Some smiled, others offered quick greetings. The transformation was complete, from rookie to veteran, from dismissed to respected, from hiding to leading. The journey had taken 3 weeks but felt like years. That evening, she returned home exhausted, the good kind of tired that came from meaningful work, from using skills and knowledge for purpose that mattered, from building something that would save lives. The apartment felt welcoming now, not refuge, home. The wooden box sat open, Navy Cross on the wall, dog tags hanging beside it, photographs visible on the dresser, evidence of service displayed instead of hidden, evidence of survival acknowledged instead of locked away. She made coffee, stood at the window, watched the city move through its evening routines. Somewhere out there, someone was planning violence. But here, in this building and others like it, people were preparing, building readiness, creating capability. The work mattered. She mattered. The skills earned through service and pain had value beyond the moment they were learned. Her phone buzzed. Message from Tate. Group of nurses want to buy you dinner. Celebration for the program. No pressure if you want privacy. But offer stands. She smiled. First genuine full smile in longer than she could remember. Typed response. Would appreciate that. Thank you. It was a small thing. Dinner with colleagues. But it represented connection. Community. The opposite of isolation she'd chosen for 2 years. The opposite of hiding. She changed clothes. Met them at a restaurant near the hospital. Tate, Keld, 3 other nurses from trauma. They talked about work and life and everything except her service record. Treated her as colleague instead of curiosity. The evening was normal, comfortable, the kind of social interaction she'd avoided because it required being present instead of distant. When she returned home later that night, the apartment felt different again. Not just home, but part of a life, a real life, with work that mattered and people who cared, and purpose that made waking up at 4:47 a.m. meaningful instead of just routine. She sat on the edge of her bed, looked at the Navy Cross on the wall, at the photographs on the dresser, at the dog tags hanging beside the metal, at the compass on her keychain sitting on the nightstand. The compass had pointed north for 2 years. North had meant away, escape, distance. But now, north meant something different. Forward, purpose, direction towards something instead of away from everything. She picked up the compass, held it in her palm, watched the needle settle. North. Always north. But the meaning had changed because she had changed, was still changing, would keep changing because that's what living meant. Growth, transformation. Becoming who you were instead of pretending to be someone smaller. Tomorrow, she'd wake at 4:47 a.m., perform her routine, go to work, train staff, build readiness, continue the mission, not as former combat medic trying to hide, as Commander March, Federal Medical Crisis Response Coordinator, using her past to build capability for others. The journey from there to here had been painful, necessary, transformative. She'd run for 2 years, hidden for 2 years, tried to be invisible for 2 years. It hadn't worked because you can't hide from yourself, can't lock away fundamental pieces of identity and expect to be whole. But now the box was open, the letter was burned, the medals were displayed, the service was acknowledged, the past was integrated with present instead of separated from it, and she was whole again. Different than before, scarred, changed, but whole. She set the compass on the nightstand beside the photo of her unit. 2 objects side by side, past and present, direction and memory, tools for navigation through life that kept moving forward whether you were ready or not. The alarm would ring at 4:47 a.m. She'd be awake when it did, ready, prepared, moving north toward whatever came next, because that's what she did. That's who she was. That's who she'd always been, underneath the fear and grief and attempts to be someone smaller. Commander Evangeline March, combat medic, trauma nurse, crisis coordinator, all of it true, all of it integrated, all of it finally aligned into purpose that made the weight worth carrying. The compass needle pointed north. She'd follow it, not away from anything, toward everything that mattered, toward the work, toward the mission, toward the life she was building from the pieces of the life she'd survived. North, always north. But this time, north meant home. Stories of transformation often begin with someone trying to disappear and end with them learning to be seen. If you've known someone who turned their deepest wounds into their greatest strength, or if you've witnessed quiet competence finally recognized, share your thoughts below. These moments matter. These stories deserve to be told. Consider subscribing to hear more narratives about courage that doesn't announce itself, but shows up when needed most.
What stayed with me long after the story ended wasn't the dramatic reveal or the federal SUVs. It was that moment in the parking lot. Evie sat in her car, alone, hands finally trembling after holding steady through everything else. She'd just saved a life. She'd been fired for it. And for those few seconds before the headlights surrounded her, she believed that doing the right thing had cost her everything. That image won't leave me. I keep thinking about the 8 minutes she worked on Admiral Garrett while everyone else argued about protocols. Not the medical skills, but the isolation. Senior staff debating clearance, federal agents blocking access, a dying man on the table, and she was the only person in that room who saw a human being instead of a procedural problem. That's a specific kind of loneliness, being the only one willing to act, while others hide behind rules and hierarchy. Being punished for it makes that loneliness cut deeper. This story is really about what happens when institutions value compliance over competence, when protocol becomes more important than purpose. Evie spent 2 years trying to disappear, trying to be small and invisible because her skills came with trauma she didn't want to carry anymore. But the moment crisis hit, her training surfaced anyway. And instead of being valued for saving a life, she was fired for breaking chain of command. That says something about how we treat people who don't fit neat categories, who have capabilities that make others uncomfortable, who remind us that real expertise often comes from places we'd rather not think about. A lot of people watching this have experienced some version of being dismissed. Maybe not on this scale, but the feeling is universal. Having your judgment questioned by people with less experience. Being told to wait for permission when waiting means failure. Watching others take credit for your work. You don't need a military background to understand what it feels like when your competence threatens someone else's authority. Here's what I'm still thinking about. If Evie had followed protocol, Admiral Garrett would have died. If she'd waited for authorization that never came, she'd have kept her job and lost a life. Was being fired the price of doing what was right? Or was it proof that the system itself was broken? And how many people in hospitals, schools, offices, anywhere face that same impossible choice between following rules and doing what actually matters? What moment in this story stayed with you the most? The firing, the salute, that quiet moment in her apartment with the locked box? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know what resonated.